Hello, and welcome to another week of Light to My Path, our 2025 Bible reading plan. This week we are reading Matthew 15 through Matthew 19 and then Psalm 55. Now, the Gospel of Matthew is, so much is happening in the Gospel of Matthew. I hope that you've enjoyed reading it so far. These few chapters, I want to just focus in for a second. I mean, there's so much we could talk about. I want to focus in on chapter 16 for a second. It begins with the Pharisees and the Sadducees asking Jesus for a sign from heaven. And these are the super religious people who are kind of in charge in the case of the Pharisees, and the Sadducees are also super religious in a little different way. They also have a lot of money and they're also kind of in charge. So they're looking for a sign, and Jesus is kind of like, oh my gosh, you guys with these signs, you don't even know what you're looking for. This generation is going to receive no sign except for the sign of Jonah, which is an interesting thing for Jesus to say. What is the sign of Jonah? Well, Jonah was the Old Testament prophet who very famously, in order to save the rest of the people who was on the ship that he was with, he was thrown into the sea and got eaten by the great fish, right? It was in the belly of the fish, in the belly of the beast, in the deep of the sea for 3 days, right? And then the fish went to shore and spit him out, right, onto shore. So this is an image that Jesus is capturing for death and resurrection. The only sign that they're going to get is what's going to happen to Jesus, his death and resurrection. Now, what is the issue here? The issue is that these Pharisees and these Sadducees, and Jesus rails on these guys a little later in the gospel. But the issue is that they wanted to have God. They wanted to be religious people. They wanted to be in charge without paying the real cost for it, without suffering, without giving their lives away. In fact, they did all these things and they heaped all kinds of burdens on people, but they didn't carry any of the burden themselves, right? And so Jesus is warning about this. So much so that in this chapter, this is where he asks Peter and the disciples this question of, who do people say I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah, right? And Jesus says, you nailed it. But then he goes on to say, this is what the Messiah will do. The Messiah will suffer, right? And be arrested and killed and give his life, actually. And this is where Peter doesn't like that. He says, he pulls him aside and he says, you can't do this. And Jesus is like, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me because you're setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things, right? And then this is where he says, anyone who wants to follow me, be my disciple, you have to take up your cross. You have to take up your cross. You have to give your life. You have to give yourself, right? And that's how you're going to follow me. And this is exactly what these Pharisees and scribes, these religious people, didn't want. They didn't want a faith that cost them anything. They just wanted a faith that was good for them. And then in chapter 17, we have this odd scene of the transfiguration where Jesus takes a few of his closest guys up to the top of the mountain, and they have this scene where Moses and Elijah appears, and it's this bizarre scene, and Jesus says, don't tell anyone about this until after the resurrection, right? But this is sort of a confirmation that the way of the Messiah was going to be one of death and suffering, but after he's raised, then it'll all be clear, right? It said, this is in verse 12 of chapter 17, so also, they did whatever they wanted to Elijah. They made him suffer. So also the Son of Man is about to suffer at their hands. This way of suffering, this is the way of discipleship, as the Gospel of Matthew makes just abundantly clear. We have to take up our cross and follow him. We have to give away our lives. This is what's at the core of this sort of upside down kingdom idea that we've been talking about as we've been going through the Gospel of Matthew. And you see it here in chapter 16 and chapter 17. You see this theme weaved throughout all of the Gospel of Matthew. And so it makes us ask the question, do we want faith without suffering? Do we want faith without the cost, right? Do we want the crown without the cross? That's sort of the question that we need to ask ourselves, because faith that's following Jesus is one that we will suffer because of it. And it's not something we should seek out, but that's part of what it means to give your life in following Jesus. And and God will hold you. God will be with you. God will redeem you. That's the sign of Jonah, that you might spend 3 days in the belly of the whale, of the fish, but God will raise you to new life. It's what happened to Jesus. It's what he promises will happen to us. Yeah, a little window into the middle of the Gospel of Matthew. Check out the Bible Project this week. Their summary video is excellent again. And please continue to ask me whatever questions you want about the Gospel of Matthew. Have a great week of reading.